Hey folks, we're going to wait just about 20 seconds to make sure everyone's connected before we start. So again, I see the audience is populating. That is great. And we're going to wait just about 15 seconds more to make sure everyone can see and hear us before we start any content. Okay. All right. Thanks for your patience. We like to do that just to make sure that everyone's connected before we start any of our content. So thanks for bearing with us. I want to welcome you all to today's presentation, How CILs Can and Should Support Consumers Experiencing Homelessness. I'm Tim Fuchs. My pronouns are he and him, and I am dialed in today from hot and sticky Washington, D.C. I'm Operations Director at the National Council on Independent Living and coordinate these ILNet webinars. So I really appreciate you all joining us this afternoon. I was happy to see such a great turnout for this topic. Over 535 people registered today. We've already got 262 people connected, and I know that number is going to grow. This webinar is, of course, brought to you by the ILNet Training and Technical Assistance Center for Centers for Independent Living. The ILNet is operated by ILRU in collaboration with NICL, April, the University of Montana, with support provided by the Administration for Community Living at the Department of Health and Human Services. So we are recording today's call, as you all are used to. That will be archived on ILRU's website. They always get it up within 48 hours, usually much sooner. And I just want to go through some other housekeeping and accessibility tips with you all before we start. So I'm going to go ahead to slide 3. And as you hopefully have already noticed, both CART captioning and ASL interpreters are available. And our active ASL interpreter will always have their camera on. You shouldn't have to worry about pinning or spotlighting's on me, but you shouldn't have to worry about pinning them unless you have some preference for doing that. Only our current interpreter and active speaker will be using their camera at a time. So hopefully that'll help things. Also, I am screen sharing. So if you want to adjust the size of the presentation or speaker and interpreter cameras, you'll want to make sure that you're in side-by-side mode. You can do that by going to the top of your screen where it says Tim Fuchs is sharing his screen. And in the drop-down box, make sure that you have selected side-by-side mode. Once you do that, you should be able to put your cursor in between the PowerPoint and the cameras and slide it back and forth to adjust the size. By the way, if you're using dual monitors, there's also a checkbox there to optimize the view for dual monitors, and you'll want to take advantage of that if you are using two computer monitors. All right. The captioning should be running. If you haven't turned that on yet and you'd like to, you should have options in your Zoom menu bar for a live transcript or closed captioning, depending on which version you're using. And make sure to click Show Subtitle. And also under those settings is subtitle settings, and you can adjust the size of the and some other features of the captioning. If you prefer to view those captions on a full screen outside of Zoom, that URL was sent to you in the materials email that you received yesterday. All right. We are going to have plenty of time for audience Q&A today. Today is structured as a panel discussion, so I will be asking some discussion questions of our panelists today, but we have several opportunities for you all to ask your own questions. You can submit a question through the Q&A tab within Zoom. If that's not accessible to you for any reason, you can email your questions to me at tim@nicl.org. That's tim@ncil.org. And if you're only on the phone today, you've called in to participate, you can press *9 on your keypad. So that's just for callers. And that's a great way to ask a question live if you're only on the phone. You're welcome to submit questions, especially through the Q&A tab or email anytime, but we are going to wait for our Q&A breaks to address them. The last piece of housekeeping information I wanted to mention is that there is an evaluation form for today. We've actually got that preloaded in Zoom. So when I end the webinar this afternoon, that evaluation will open on your screen. If you could take a moment to fill that out, we would really appreciate it. And if you don't have time, the link was sent to you in the materials email that you received yesterday. But obviously, we all know it's hard to remember to go back and fill those out. And it is a quick eval. So if you could share your thoughts when we end today, we'd really appreciate it. All right, I'm going to go ahead to slide 4 and introduce our panelists for today. I really want to thank Georgina and Robbie for all the work that they've put into this and being willing to take time out of their very busy day jobs to share what they've learned at their CILs about supporting consumers who are experiencing homelessness. So Georgina Alvarez is Associate Director at CIL, Central Coast Center for Independent Living in and around Salinas, California. And Robbie is IL Programs Director at Atlantis Community in the Denver area. And I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with them on a number of presentations before, and I'm really excited to have them back here today for this topic. So thanks so much for being with us, you all. We'll hear from them in just a moment. The last thing to do before we get our speakers on the line is just to cover these learning objectives on slide 5. So our goal for today is that you all will learn creative approaches that educate communities to advocate against barriers for securing safe, accessible housing, outreach strategies that inform and foster an atmosphere for collaboration among providers, government entities, the business community, and other stakeholders about available homeless prevention resources and services inclusive of consumers who are BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and who are multiply marginalized. Funding streams for homelessness prevention activities, including leveraging COVID-19 funding to support consumers without places to live. And I'm going to go ahead to slide 6 now. And Gina is actually our first speaker. We're going to get kind of an overview of CIL and Atlantis Community before we dive into some of the questions specific to their programs for people who are unhoused. So Gina, I will turn it over to you. And just let me know when you want me to switch your slides.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I was going to say good morning, but it's already afternoon. So welcome. And today I will be going over the IL services, especially, how CIL has been able to grow and implement rapid housing and homeless prevention services following, the IL philosophy and independent living services. So we can go to the next one. So as you might know, we are one of the 28 independent living centers in California. We provide, as we are all mandated, the IL core services. And then we also have a rapid housing and homeless prevention services. So it has been exciting for us to incorporate services for those who are in shelter or experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness within the IL philosophy and the IL core services. So it has been a great impact in our community, and we were able to leverage and bring resources to us. So we can go to the next one. So what have we done at CIL? How do we start with all these, rapid housing services, and how do we got into the homeless services in our community? So back in 2014, we started working with the veterans. We started working with another partner locally, the Housing Resource Center, in implementing the SSVF program. We did the program for about 2 years. It was a really good opportunity for us to really see and learn, from what's happening in the community with people who are experiencing homelessness, especially, with those veterans who were coming back from Iran, for those wars, that they were homeless. What is it that happened to them that they ended up being on the streets, and how can we support them? in the journey of getting, services and housing to stabilize them and get them, the support that they need. How can we unify them again? Family reunification, how can we bring them back to the family? So 2014, we started working with Housing Resource Center. We provided rapid housing to veterans. As long with the rapid housing, we provided case management or independent living services, independent living skills training, housing search. But we extended more than the housing search. We help the consumers, we help the veterans to apply for the housing. We help them to get in communication with the landlords, how to talk to the landlords, how to talk to a potential, homeowner that they can rent a room from. So we did a lot of independent living skills, a lot of teaching them how to become more independent, a lot of individual assistance advocacy. So that's the main goals that we did with the rapid housing with the veterans. We also have some of them that were struggling to sustain their housing because they had they were experiencing a medical condition and they had to stop working. They were waiting for the veterans benefits or social security benefits, and we know how long it takes for someone to get approved for social security benefits. So we also help them get into homeless prevention. We, as part of the support services or SSBF, we were able to collaborate closely with the continuum of care locally. With that comes homeless services providers, the county, the city, and other nonprofits within the county. So because of the success that CISO had with SSBF, in 2016 we were approached by the city of Salinas to really try a pilot project with them under the emergency solution grants. That was the first grant that we got outside the SSBF to really help the entire community. That will be for anyone that is experiencing homelessness or was at risk of losing their housing for whatever reason. So we were able to secure the funding source. We started building the program. It was challenging at the beginning because as an independent living center, we're consumer choice, consumer driven. With the ESG is a housing first model, right? We house them regardless of whatever conditions they're going through, regardless if they have income, if they don't have income, if they are actively using drugs or alcohol, and they don't want any type of rehab. So we had to follow the housing first model. It was difficult because as an ILC, we respect the consumer choice of either following or not following up with the housing goals. So we had to modify and make it work, make it like into a collaboration within the city, the ILCs, and really bringing together the IL philosophy with the housing first. CISO has been in a unique position where, we can utilize the other ILCs services, the housing, independent living, training, benefits counseling, as well as individual and system change advocacy, as long with the housing first model. So we secured the funding with the city of Salinas. We presented the project, and that brings us back to 2018, 2 years after, being working with the city of Salinas for the HDAP, the Housing and Disability Advocacy Program. That one is more targeted to people who are in the process of applying for Social Security benefits. And, that's one of the services that we offer. Also in 2018, we were approached by the health department within Mora County to become a partner with the whole person care. California has this program, or had, is set to expire on December 2020, to provide services to consumers who are experiencing homelessness within the county, but also who has been, has multiple hospital readmissions. So they have been in and out of the emergency rooms because they don't have a home, they don't have medical care. So that's another project that we're working on. With all those, success and funding, we were able to extend our partnerships with the continuum of care, within the local homeless providers. We got funding and we continue working with them. So we can go to the next slide. So like I said, we had the challenges because we had it with all those, City of Salinas, HDAP, whole person care. It was a challenge at the beginning. So we had to We can design the program, we can bring a program, but how can we sustain the program? Because we didn't want to have a new pilot project for a year and then, it's gone the next day. So we had to sit down, I had to work a lot, do a lot of research, learn from the mistakes that we did probably at the beginning, and come up with a program design. The staff, how many case managers do we bring on? Do we need any trainings outside, the normal ILC trainings that we get? Do we need to get staff certified to do rapid housing services? And how do we put all of them into one, right? How do we merge IELTS philosophy with the housing first model? So then how can we continue the partnership within the local community? Do we bring just the other nonprofits? Do we extend it to the local city officials, to the county? What happened with the, with the housing authorities? Because all of them, we have to work in partnership to make that rapid housing program a success. So we decided the program, we established a lot of MOUs with local nonprofits. We started working with the local shelters. We started going to different outreach meetings. A lot of street outreach was done at the beginning, literally the case managers going down the streets and meeting person where they are. Instead of coming to the office, we met with them, either we're homeless and they were at the hospital, probably we will go to the hospital, meet with them, go to the other shelters, go to the continuum of care office, whatever we had to go to meet the consumer, CISO staff will go and meet with them where they are. For those that can come to the office, we also have the option to come to the office. So we can go to the next one. So, we designed the program. Everything was good in paper. We had the partnerships. We have MOUs with different nonprofits, with the county, with the city. So everyone was really on board. We started working, we started placing people into permanent and affordable housing. But we also had another challenge of, is the housing available? Is the housing accessible? Because we didn't want to house anyone just because we have an apartment on the East Salinas. You go into the East Salinas, regardless of what condition the apartment or the neighborhood might be. The main challenges that we have faced and we continue facing is going to be the lack of affordable housing that is accessible to people with disabilities, the lack of transitional housing. Some of the consumers that we're working with have been homeless for years, many, many years. We have a couple of them have been working for 30 years, homeless for 30 years. And it's difficult to make the transition to permanent housing without that transitional, getting them prepped to go back to housing. Housing barriers. What is it that the consumer has on the background? What is it that the consumer comes with? Do they have income? Can they sustain a unit? Can they sustain an apartment? Even we pay for the house, for their moving expenses, secure deposit, first month rent. Can they continue making the rent? Or after the assistance ends, are they going back to the streets? So we needed to identify all of those barriers. Do they have a criminal background? Can they qualify for a Section 8 voucher? If they do, what is it they're going to need to provide to the housing authority? So what do we do with those that are registered sex offenders? In California, the 290s, there is no housing for them, because they have all those requirements, stay away from the schools, from the apartments, for the, play areas. So that's the biggest challenge that we have. How do we sustain it? How do we sustain a program and don't let it go away? How can we bring the city, the county, and everyone? So like I said, we designed it, we acknowledged the barriers that we had, we identified, what strategies we can use. So we went, how can we do it? How can we sustain the program? So what we did was really work with the city, the county, the state, the local foundations. We work a lot with the foundations to bring, to bring us together, to bring us to the point that we can provide the same services to the same goals. So in terms of the challenges was really the main one. And I think that a lot of the ILCs have a lot of Internally, it was a change for all the IL staff, because as you guys know, most of the ILCs, they don't call like case managers to the independent living specialists. They're called independent living specialists. They are not called like case management. But how we did it is we define a case management as independent living services. So we're teaching them how to be independent. We're teaching them a lot of how to access the benefits, how to be independent, how to self-advocate for them, how to do a budget, how to look for transportation and that is accessible. So we're teaching them a lot of independent living services. For us, we had to change the titles of the case managers or the independent living specialists to case managers, but we at CISO define case management as independent living services. So we provide the core services, INR, individual assistance change. So that's how we have been doing it. It has been working with us. We're still within the core services of the ILC. Again, the main thing is working in collaboration, working in partnerships so that we can overcome all those barriers. As part of the partnerships and to bring programs to the ILCs, to the county, we work a lot with the local housing authority to help the consumers apply for vouchers. In Maury County, we have what they call in set-aside vouchers. Those are for people who are experiencing homelessness. And now they have, I don't know you guys have here, but we have the new emergency vouchers that are coming up, for those experiencing homelessness as part of the new CARES program. So we have been working with them. We have been doing a lot of education to the county, the city, housing authorities, partnerships that we work with the consumers. We don't work for them. We teach them, we guide them, we present them the different options that are available for them. We do the pros and cons of every options that we have. And at the end of the day is the consumer choice. It's really the consumer choice whether or not they want to get rapid housing services, they want to get homeless prevention services, whether or not they want to work with CISO. So we have been expanding. We have been having a lot of challenges with local partners, with the city, because it's like, well, I'm sending you a referral. They need to be housed. They need to be housed. I'm like, we understand that they need to be housed, but do they want to be housed? Do they want to get the services? Are you asking them that that's what they need? We have been also providing, and we can go to the next one, team. We can be also helping them into motel vouchers. And a lot of them, being referred to us for housing services. It's a challenge. What we did was do a lot of education, do a lot of outreach, community outreach, community education to continue, working on those partnerships to work as a team, to help them understand, how the independent living center works, that we work at the whole person, that we work that the consumer is the lead on the services that they're getting. Not the IL case manager, not the staff, not the outreach specialist, not the housing navigator. Regardless of the title, the consumer is the one that has the choice. The consumer is the one that will tell us what they need at the time that they want it and for how long they want services. So what was next for us? Continue working in partnerships, going to the community meetings, do a lot of education, continue leveraging the funding so that we can continue with the services instead of, doing a pilot project for a year and then it's over. We have had it, I think now it's going to be 6 years and it's growing. Like I said, we have been doing during these difficult times during the pandemic. We didn't have any experience at all running like an emergency program. We were able to get into partnerships to do emergency hotel vouchers for those that are high risk of, getting COVID. We placed a lot of people into hotels. We had housed over 100 people, who were on the motel programs, who were homeless, from March 2020 to today. So it has been a really success for us, but it's not easy. It's a challenge. How do we bring those two programs together? It's difficult. We can go next. And I
Okay.
think that's all I have.
Thank you for the overview, Gina. Okay, the only question we received so far was from Bonnie. And you really responded to this. I don't know if you want to say anything else about it, but Bonnie was concerned about the fact that you all were providing case management services. And how were you doing that from a CIL? I know that you said, you're really just providing IL services to meet that aspect of the grant. I don't know if you want to add anything there or not.
At the center, at the ILC, we had a lot of, and they cannot see the interpreter. I think that it went out. So as an ILC, it was the biggest struggle that we have. That was the biggest challenge. How do we bring the housing first? How do we bring homeless services to an ILC? And you're right, at the beginning, we were independent living specialists. But what we've seen locally within our own community, within Maury County, San Benito, and Santa Cruz County, that if we bring a different title to the staff, calling them case managers or doing case management, is really how we are defining case management. And for us, was really IL services, independent living, system change, individual advocacy, INR services, transitional and diversion services. For those that were on homelessness, probably went to nursing homes, and we were able to move them out of the nursing home to permanent housing. So it's really identifying, how can we bring two programs together and still follow both IL, follow the IL philosophy.
Okay, great. And Bonnie acknowledged that you answered her question earlier too, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. We do have some other content questions. I just want to acknowledge there are a couple people who are having trouble viewing the interpreters. And I apologize if you already heard this, but just quickly, I want to point out a few things. Captioning is running. And I mentioned that because I'm going to give some instructions. Make sure that you're in side-by-side mode. So at the top of the screen where it says you are viewing Tim Fuchs's screen or Tim Fuchs is sharing his screen, click on the options there and make sure you're in side-by-side mode. Also, if you don't see a way to switch to gallery view, see if there are two gray boxes above the active speaker, which is probably Georgina right now. And click the two gray boxes and see if that will display the interpreter. Hannah and Whitney are interpreters today. Hannah is the current interpreter, so that's who you should see. And again, it's been working well for us, so I will keep trying to give tips. Okay. All right, we're not gonna have time for all these content questions, but we will have a longer Q&A break at the end of the call. So let me try to get through a couple of these. So Gina, Hope is wondering, was the county providing the emergency vouchers, and how did you manage that?
So it was, well, in California, we had the Project Room Key, right? So we got quite a bit of funding to fund Project Room Key. Initially, the county was running it, was in charge of, designing the program. And then after a few months of them running, it's like, well, this is not something that the county can do, right? So they started working for, looking for different nonprofits to help them to run the Project Room Key. We got emergency vouchers through the city of Salinas because they also got a lot of that COVID-19 money. So they also say, we have this funding, we have a lot of people that need emergency shelter right now. So we also work with the city of Salinas. At that time, the local community foundation said, we are changing, instead of, doing the normal type of funding cycle that they used to do, they decided to put a lot of money into the COVID relief fund. So we applied for funding to community foundations. We were also contacted by a local foundation and say, you have been selected. Would you like to receive some funding from us to continue, the rapid housing program and emergency vouchers that you guys have. So we say yes. Um, and that's how we bring the emergency vouchers to the program, to the ILC, is really through the collaborations that we had, is really, working with the county, with Project Roomkey, because that was huge. At one point, Project Roomkey had over 100 people. We had 100 rooms, but in terms of people getting services, close to 140 individual cases that we had in there. We housed half of them, which is really good. Because we also had the Project Home Key, which is also another program within California that they decided to put money to convert motels into permanent housing. So we have 100 rooms, but again, because it was a motel and now it's being converted to permanent housing, we were only able to move 50 people from Project Room Key to Project Home Key. And then we housed 30 more people out of that community. So that's how we bring it up to them. We prioritize it. I say, those that are at high risk of getting COVID, that's who is getting an emergency voucher. Is really going into who gets priority over who. But it was based on the definition that the state had on COVID. That's how we did it. We followed the state guidelines, and all of the people that were referred to or continue to be referred to CISO, they have to be a person with a disability. They have to self-identify as someone with a disability. Again, that's a struggle that we had with the city. That's a struggle that we have with the partners, because they say, oh, I have so-and-so and they need a voucher. I'm like, great, you can refer them to us, but do they have a disability? And someone saying, no, I'm like, I'm sorry, we will have to deny services, but we can refer them to another partner agency that might be able to help them. So we did the screening. They had it to be a person with a disability. They had it to self-disclose, self-identify, and again, working in collaboration with the local partners, local cities, county, and foundations to bring those vouchers for emergency rooms, emergency hotel vouchers.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gina. We have a ton of good questions, but I want to make sure that we have time for the whole presentation and discussion. So those questions are not going anywhere. And when we take when we begin our Q&A break at the end, I will start with those. For now, though, I am going to go ahead to slide 13, and we're going to turn this over to Robbie, who's going to walk us through the overview of Atlantis and their work. Robbie?
Hi, so yeah, my name is Robbie, and my pronouns are he, him. And next slide, please, Tim. At Atlantis, so Atlantis was founded in 1975, and at the time we're the second Center for Independent Living. Currently, there are 8 centers for independent living in Colorado. And we were next slide, please. So like all CILs, our mission is to advocate for people with disabilities to be able to live in the community setting of their choice. Next slide, Tim. And then, of course, everyone is familiar with independent living philosophy, which, outlines how we provide our services. Next slide, Tim. And so with the mobile unit, we follow the same process that we do at our brick and mortar, our main location. And that, that process is the same. Start with the intake process and then developing the goals, the independent living plans. And then from that point, the consumer gets assigned to an independent living specialist, and then they start doing the work necessary to achieve their goals. And with the mobile unit, we provide all of those core services through the mobile unit for folks that are eligible for services through the mobile unit. And it's, next slide, please, Tim. With our mobile unit, we cover a 7-county catchment area, but prior to, we've always served that 7-county area. We began we had already identified a lot of the barriers that unhoused folks experience, even just when it comes to getting to our main office. So in 2017, there was another CIL in the metro area that had closed down, and we had the opportunity to apply for a separate Part C grant to create the mobile office. And that mobile office is designed to serve people who are unhoused. And in addition to that, it's folks who there may have a barrier related to their disability that's preventing them from getting to our CIL. So they may already be housed, but can be additional barriers that would prevent the person from getting to the CIL. And we had just recognized that there was a huge crossover with people who are unhoused who have disabilities. And we had started to recognize that a lot of those additional barriers that come along with being unhoused, whether it's just not access to public transportation, not having access to telephone or any other type of technology on a stable basis. And another part that makes it really difficult is in the metro area, there has just been a huge increase in the unhoused community. And their metro area, there are these ongoing and continuous sweeps that forces people who are unhoused move on to where? And that's the dilemma, is because they just, they're forced through the police and the sheriff's department to just move on, but they're not given any opportunity to get any type of permanent housing. At that point, there's not a lot of access to hotel vouchers. So the mobile office, which is fully accessible, has given us an opportunity to create a mobile office that functions the same as our main office. And it gives us an opportunity to meet people where they are in the community. And regarding outreach, which is a really big part of the mobile unit, for 7 counties within the Denver metro area. And part of our catchment area does include rural areas. And during the pandemic, it has created, it's had a huge impact on doing outreach and just being able to maintain contact with our unhoused consumers. We've been able to partner up with a number of local organizations, including the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, shelters, libraries, parks. There are a couple of there's what's called the Project Homeless Connect, which is a 1-day resource fair that's held in the convention center. And that's an area where people who are unhoused, they can show up to one location and get connected with a lot of the services that they may need in order to gain their independence and to secure housing. There's another event that's the annual Day of Dignity that's actually held out in the community, which also is, that kind of bridges a barrier for folks who may not even be able to get to the convention center. And there are some other local advocacy organizations, one being Denver Homeless Out Loud. We've also been able to join different types of work groups through our local human services office. So we have a shelter and service providers group that meets on a monthly basis in order to in order to be able to just come together as a group and talk about the different barriers that are continuing to exist. We can talk about new or different services as they become available. Next slide, Tim. So, as I had said earlier, we had the opportunity to apply for a grant, which we were awarded the grant. But the grant itself wasn't enough to cover the entire cost of the vehicle. When we started putting the plan together, could you go to the next slide, please, Tim? When we started to put that grant together, we had the realization that if we're going to fully customize this vehicle to be able to provide the services that we need to, we wouldn't have been able to lease it, because if you lease a vehicle and you start, making all these customizations to it, if for some reason we would have had to return the vehicle through that lease, we probably would not have been able to do that. Next slide, please. So that's our mobile office there, and it's really similar to locally just a paratransit vehicle. And when we first got it, it had 3 rows of bench seats with 1 wheelchair securement area. And what we had done, next slide, please. What we had been able to do was we removed the bench seats, and we were able to create 2 desks, 1 over each of the wheels. And then we also kept the wheelchair securement area. We don't provide transportation for our consumers, but by having that wheelchair securement area in it, it gives the ability to hire an independent living specialist who may use some type of a mobility device. Next slide, please. That's a photo of myself, and you can see the 2 desks. Up above, there are a couple of storage areas that allows us to keep a lot of the day-to-day supplies that we may need in order to provide those services. There's an auxiliary overhead air conditioning and heating unit, which is really helpful in just maintaining, it maintains a climate inside the vehicle during the summertime and the winter time. And it also allows us to make adjustments for folks whose bodies may not regulate temperature in a consistent manner. Next slide. That's, as I mentioned earlier, part of our catchment area is really out in these rural areas where folks may not have access to where their closest human services office may be, or any other types of service providers. So it does allow us the opportunity to really go to all parts of our catchment area to make sure that we're able to serve those and underserved communities. Next slide, please. And again, that's just a different, just another view of the mobile office. Next slide, please. One of our really rural areas there as well. We were able, so regarding, the pandemic, we were able to secure a COVID CARES Act grant for the mobile unit. And some things that we had done in order to address some of those additional barriers, especially for folks that are experiencing homelessness, we were able to put together what we call a shelter-in-place kit. And that included a backpack backpack, a tent, a sleeping bag, personal protective equipment, and water bottles. And again, that gave folks who are unhoused some semblance of being able to self-quarantine and just to protect themselves the best that they could during the pandemic, as opposed to going into some type of a congregate setting. In addition to the shelter-in-place kits, we were able to purchase, initially we looked at it to address the food insecurity specifically related to the pandemic. And we had started to form some partnerships with an organization called Cafe 180 that was providing emergency food boxes. But we had also recognized that folks who are unhoused, they're not going to have any place to store that food. They're not going to have a way to prepare the food. So from for our unhoused folks, we started purchasing gift cards for grocery stores, which would allow them to go into the grocery store. They could buy prepared meals. They could buy meals off of, like the hot bar, where it's food that's already cooked and it's hot. They can use those gift cards to really purchase whatever grocery items that they feel they will be able to use as they're out in the community. We were also able to put together technology packages. We partnered up with another local organization that refurbishes computers and laptops. So we were able to put together a technology package that includes a laptop with a wireless hotspot and with 6 months of internet service. And that's really been a game changer for us to be able to maintain contact with folks who are in the community to do the best that we can to provide uninterrupted services during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So one other thing that I want to touch on regarding, ways that we've addressed the lack of services and barriers in just areas of opportunity that we're missing regarding serving the BIPOC community. So a couple of years ago, we had decided to take a look at our organization internally to see where, what kind of opportunities are we missing to be able to best provide supports to members of the BIPOC community. So we had met with a consulting company to create, our own EDI objectives and action plan in order to give us some direction to address the lack of the EDI work that's being done. And through that, we were able to commit, we created an internal EDI committee, which is broken down into subcommittees. And some of the things that we realized we would have to do if we were really going to commit to EDI work, we're creating listening sessions specific to the BIPOC community to get their feedback regarding what are the gaps in services in their communities. From there, we had started to meet with partner agencies and service providers within the BIPOC communities to talk about why we're doing the EDI work and just to start building and nurturing relationships within those communities. And a couple of examples of organizations that we're in the process of developing the relationships. Due to COVID, we were really limited to that. But as some of the restrictions in the metro area are starting to open up, we're trying to build relationships with Black Lives Matter 5280. There's another organization called Servicios de la Raza. We're also trying to partner up with local racial justice organizations. We've had to assess our marketing and outreach material and to ensure that there's just representation across those racial and ethnic lines. And we're going to be setting some lunch and learn events where we can invite members of the BIPOC community into our space and just really have an opportunity to sit down and listen to what their needs are. So I think that pretty much covers regarding so with the mobile unit, it's fully staffed with 2 full-time independent living specialists. So it gives an opportunity, during regular, outside of the pandemic, the day-to-day operations are split up between spending time at those outreach locations so we can let folks know, hey, this is who we are, and these are the types of services we provide. And then once we do the intake and create the independent living plan, we also use the mobile unit to have those follow-up meetings in order to continue working on the independent living plans with our consumers.
So Robbie, this is Tim. I want to just grab a couple of the questions that have come in specifically for you, and then we've got a bunch of other questions that I think are going to be answered as we go through some of the panel discussion questions in a few minutes. But looking at what's come in, I know Daryl was wondering specifically how you deal with the Wi-Fi and internet access issue, especially in remote areas and while you're using the mobile unit. So what does that look like from the mobile unit? How do you stay connected?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. And that is, that is something that we are, constantly trying to reassess, because within the mobile unit, we use laptops and we use, wireless spots. And there's also an onboard modem and router, but all 3 of those use, SIM cards through a data plan. And there are areas that we go to where there's just not a signal. So with that, any of the paperwork that we would need, because we use an online database to do our intakes. But what we have to make sure and do is we'll print out paper copies of those forms in case we get into an area where we don't have an internet signal. We can still conduct the intake and create the independent living plans there on the spot. And then once the mobile unit gets back into our main office, or just when they get back to a location where there would be internet service, they just have to go back in and enter all of that information from the paper copies into CIL Suite, which is the web-based database that we use. We've started to, last year, I've started doing some research to see if there are any options for some type of a satellite-based internet service, but haven't really been successful yet in trying to find something like that. But we do feel like by being able to have those paper copies, that's a thing that we've come up with in order to address that issue in the meantime.
Okay, thanks, Robbie. So I just want to acknowledge a few people that have other questions. And again, I'm going to do my best to get those answered during our own panel discussion questions. And then again, we're going to circle back to these at the end of the webinar. I'm going to go ahead to slide 28 here. We really covered this already. So in the interest of time, this how did you begin? I mean, that's kind of what we've been talking about in this overview. So you know now how CIL and Atlantis got started in this work. I think this is really the next one that I want to talk about. And let me preface this with, believe me, I saw the questions from a number of people, right? And just like we anticipated, like, okay, that's great. How do we get people housed? And so I do want to, we're going to talk about some tips and some solutions here, but you know, we can't, we all know how hard and how unchanging that the lack of accessible, affordable housing is. So we're not going to be able to solve that housing piece today, but let's look at some solutions that we do have. If you want resources on the housing piece, we have gobs of information and trainings on housing advocacy and partnerships and those sorts of things, but that's a whole nother training. So I just want to acknowledge that first. Here on slide 29, the question says, you both live in areas that have experienced rapid growth and rising expenses. I think we all feel that way. Coastal California and the Denver area, it's really been unprecedented. So how do you deal with the shortage of affordable, accessible housing? Gina, I'm going to come to you first, and then I'll come to Robbie afterwards.
Thank you, Tim. For us, it has been the partnerships with the local housing authority. You know, and throughout these years of experience doing the rapid housing, is building collaborations with the housing developers. You know, we have Chispa, we have Midpen, who are the local, you know, housing developers in the area who provide affordable housing. So we work in a really close relationship with them. The housing authority with the Section 8 vouchers, or, you know, choice vouchers, as we call them. Accessible housing is difficult. Finding a market rate apartment is expensive. It's getting expensive as the minute pass. But what we have been doing is doing a lot of collaboration with the local, housing developers, establishing relationships with local landlords, doing a lot of educations, the benefits of renting a room or renting a home or an apartment to someone with a Section 8 voucher is that you have your rent warranty. You know, they only have to pay depending on the income. We have some consumers that only pay like $9 a month. We also say them, you know, they have the backup of the ILC under the rapid housing services. We will continue doing rapid housing, case management, or independent living services. But it's difficult, again, is building that relationships with your local housing developers, the local housing authority that is going to get you some results. It's not easy, it takes time, but it's, again, having staff that are really to work, really to collaborate, and that they have a lot of patience, that they know kind of do sales, because that's at the end of the day is how we're doing, right? We're looking for a unit and we're trying to, you know, really market or say, you know, I have so-and-so who is really good on communicating, who is really good on paying bills, or who has never had any housing evictions, has a Section 8 voucher, is really on the path of getting a job. So it's doing a lot of that. It's a lot of prepping the consumers how to communicate with the landlords, how to go for an interview, how to go for a housing viewing. It's a lot of independent living skills, a lot of collaboration, and finding a way, you know, how we can bring new landlords. Do we work more with the housing authority? Do we work on giving them a stipend? What was kind of a landlord incentive with them? What is it that we need to do to bring more of them to the table? And just working with our local housing developers. That's how we have been able to do it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gina. So Robbie, same question for you. The costs in the Denver area and really Colorado have been unbelievable. So how have you all dealt with that in the Denver area?
You know, I could echo a lot of the stuff, you know, that Georgina has mentioned, but where we do try to focus is, you know, we try to coordinate and collaborate with the different counties, their local housing authorities. And when we get advance notification that a Section 8 lottery is going to be opening up, you know, to at least submit the interest cards. You know, we just stay in contact the best we can with the consumers. And when we get those notifications, you know, we contact them immediately, and we can meet them where they are and use the equipment that we have to support them with at least getting their names entered into those lotteries, which again, you know, that's just the first part of the process. You know, that still doesn't, you know, address the immediate need for the housing, but at least it gives us an opportunity to kind of get on those waiting lists while we continue to just really dig in and do the research to find out what other opportunities are out there. We work with our local Veterans Administration. So for folks who are veterans, we can connect with the VA, so the consumer can get a case manager through the VA, and we can work together to get folks qualified and to receive a VASH voucher. We are fortunate to have access to 3 transitional apartments in the metro area, which, you know, it's a drop in the bucket, but at least it gives an opportunity to potentially meet that immediate need. The transitional units have a 6-month lease that's attached to them. There have been instances where we're able to get that lease extended to do what we can to keep a roof over someone's head, so then they can continue that search and work on their other goals. And it's just about forming those working relationships with leasing agencies and landlords. And we do have a list of different leasing agencies that we do work with, and they reach out to us and let us know if they're going to have an apartment that's going to be opening up. We stay in contact with them and just keep that line of communication open to try and fill those areas. And it's outside of that, it's like that's the number one dilemma, because there's just not a lot out there that is considered affordable and accessible housing. We can continue to do some advocacy on a systems level and on an individual level as well, depending on what type of accessibility features the consumer may need. By having those working relationships with landlords, it's a lot easier to introduce and have that conversation about specific types of accessibility features that they may need inside of the unit itself. We do our best to, when we're working with folks, we are really clear with identifying what type of accessibility features do they need. Do we need to make sure that they're on the ground floor? Do we have to check and see to make sure that there's elevators in the building? A lot of the older buildings in the metro area, they don't have elevators in them. And it's just a lot of those things that add to the lack of the accessibility.
Yep. Well, I appreciate it, Robbie. I think, you know, too, as I see these questions come in, and I know these are daunting issues. I think, you know, I've been thinking through the analogy of the way that, you know, we support people when they're living in nursing homes and institutions and other congregate settings as they sort of map their goals and a transition plan, right? And so what we don't want to do is we want to make sure that we're providing services to people even when they're unhoused, even when they don't have you know, a place to live, so that they can still receive, you know, IL services and create their own goals and get support. I mean, that's what we love to see. So even if the housing issue is a significant barrier in your area, and where is it not? I hope that you all will still think about how you might implement some of these things, or explore building programs like these. I know a lot of this does, and when I say this, I mean the question here that we're talking about, a lot of this does hinge on partnerships. So I'm actually going to go ahead to slide 30, where we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So coming back to you, Gina, and you covered some of this in your intro, but what local or state partners have been critical in doing this work? And since you already gave us that overview, I think I'm kind of interested in this second piece, right? That when did those relationships happen? So thinking about this from the perspective of CILs that want to get started in this work, were those relationships you already had that you leveraged? Or did you need to build them from scratch to start, getting some funding in the door and beginning working with people experiencing homelessness?
So for us, we had a little bit of funding from the City of Salinas under the CDBG, the block grants. Again, those were really like about a 10,000, 5,000 grant that we got from them every year about, doing a lot of housing for education, tenant rights, um, independent living services. We also had a contract with the health department under the MHSA, or Mental Health Services Act in California. So we were getting a little bit of money from them, but it was really more into benefits counseling, teaching the consumers how to go back to work and, kind of keep some of the Social Security benefits or don't lose them. So we started with those two basic contracts with them, really doing a lot of collaboration. After that, the city have seen, the work that we have been doing with the homeless, with the veterans homeless. So they wanted to start using the ESG, the Emergency Solution Grants that were coming from the state. So we worked together, designed the program. And that's also when whole person care coming into the picture. With us, the health department for Maury County has both the MHSA and whole person care funding available. So we also contract and another subcontract with the county and the whole person care. We had the partnerships in place. We were getting a little bit of funding from them, but really showing up that work that we were doing a lot of community education about the ILC. That's what really it is about. Doing a lot of outreach, educating the community, educating the local partners, the city, the county officials that we provide a lot of services. We are like a core agency in Maury County. We have been doing it for more than 35 years. We have the experience of how to work with people with disabilities. It was a lot of education. It was a lot of building within the partnerships that we have with the city, with the county, with the local nonprofits, but really building out from the current contracts that we had in place to extend them to different areas, extend it to the homeless services. And that's really how we did it, it's bringing back from the city, from the CDBG, from the health department under MHSA. From there, it was, whole person care, HDAP. We also have another contract with Santa Cruz County Social Services for HDAP services as well, because they got aware of, the work that we have been doing on placing and securing affordable housing for consumers in Maury County. So we were able to extend HDAP services for Santa Cruz County as well, once we have a established rapid housing program in Maury County. And that's the goal for us. We want to grow the program to Santa Cruz and San Benito County as well. But it's building from that relationship that we already have in place.
Great. Thank you, Gina. So coming to you, Robbie, I mean, your journey, your program looks a little bit different, but what partnerships have either been necessary for this work, or have you all built through your work with the mobile unit and for people who are unhoused?
It's been a combination. At Atlantis, we had an internal Section 8 department that would administer Section 8 vouchers for the local housing authorities. So those working relationships go pretty far back. And, that's where those relationships started to develop with the housing authorities and with the leasing agents and landlords in the metro area that would accept the vouchers. Since we've had the mobile unit in operation, we've really started to focus on building relationships. So there's the Mental Health Center of Denver, and then there's Rocky Mountain Human Services. So really being able to collaborate with those organizations, because they do have specific Section 8 vouchers that are set aside for people who are receiving services from their organizations. And then, you know, outside of that, you know, just during the course of doing our outreach, we just take advantage of whatever opportunities we have to, you know, maybe they're out doing outreach and they might come across a property that is listed that they have vacancies, you know, so that's an opportunity to get our foot in the door and to just talk with those leasing agents and explain to them who we are and the type of work we're trying to do. You know, it doesn't, you know, those scenarios, it still doesn't do anything to address the affordability issue, but at least, you know, it does give us some potential options. You know, and another thing that I didn't mention before, as far as, you know, where we're trying to just be creative and really think outside of the box is, you know, we will sometimes try to connect consumers who may be interested in a roommate situation, or, you know, in the metro area, there are folks who are not in the disability community, but they have some type of housing, and they may be willing to rent a room to someone in order for that homeowner to like supplement, you know, whether it's their mortgage or just supplement the rent. But I think our main, you know, the main relationships that we've been focusing on are with those mental health centers and Rocky Mountain Human Services and similar organizations.
Great, thanks. All right, I'm going to go ahead to 31. I really feel like I'm looking at the clock here. I feel like we have talked a lot about this, right? So, you know, CICL was able to leverage those new programs that they got to fund a lot of this work. Atlantis is essentially running this through their IL program. Any additional items? I'm going to just look at both of you and ask any additional items around funding or staffing this work that you want to mention over and above what you all put in the in your CIL overview?
I think for us was really, you know, bringing both programs to feed the IL philosophy and really to meet the mission that CISO has. And that's how we have been able, you know, leveraging the resources, looking for the funding, looking for the partnerships with the local nonprofits as well. So it's building for what we have, keep up the communication with the funders, keep up, you know, working together with the community to find the needs. Because we also do, like, you know, quarterly surveys with our consumers to find out if they need additional services, you know, what else can we do for them? So we do ask them. But it's a lot of leveraging, a lot of expanding, looking for funding sources to continue the programs. But it's really bringing it back to the IL services, the core services, the IL philosophy, the CISO mission statement that we have. And again, it might be that we don't even need a lot of funding, but we just need those partnerships. You know, it's nice to have because we have quite a bit of funding to provide rapid housing. We help them with our first month secure deposit and first month rent. But once we do that, what's next for those that we place into housing? So it's doing a lot of applying for Social Security benefits, helping them to go back to the workforce if they feel that they can go back to work. What we have noticed is that when we place someone into permanent housing with rental assistance is how do they sustain after, you know, the funding is over? Because as we know, contracts is for a year, contract it might be for 2 years, but how do they sustain after that? So what we have seen is that once we place someone into permanent housing, they have been able to work on their employment goals. They have been able to get more medical care. So, they're more healthy, so they can go back to work, so they can sustain the housing. So that is giving us the opportunity to help more people, to really leverage the resources that we have, using the core funding that we have as a tool to pay for some of the case managers' time, and use some of the rapid housing for the financial assistance is how we have been doing it now with all this money that is coming up from the state, from the feds for COVID. It's really how can we best use that to meet the needs. For us, we have been able to secure funding for the next 2 years under COVID. We are hoping to get more funding. Probably I will know more by the end of the week. Again, all of that is coming back to all the funding that is coming from the state. In California, we're waiting to get the final approval for the budget, who also has more than 12 millions on funding for unsheltered communities, for those that are experiencing homelessness or they're at a shelter. So we have more resources coming up, but we're looking to see, how can we bring that funding source to CISO that's coming up. Again, we work a lot with the consumers themselves, is really working with them on going back to work, applying for Social Security benefits, applying for other program funding that they might qualify for. If they have kids, do we work with CalWorks? Do we work with Department of Social Services to help them apply for general assistance? Do we have youth? Because that's the other one that we have been working a lot, is youth who are experiencing homelessness, who are sheltered, who might be running away for the family for whatever reason. They have issues with them, they don't get along, or they go into a fight and they just decided to run away. So how do we bring all of them to help us leverage the funding source to continue the work that we're doing? That will be ongoing. Continue paying for staff time. Like I say, we use the 7 Cs. We might use Department of Rehab 204 to continue for staff time. We might use ESG to pay just for the financial assistance. So it's really, bringing those two funding sources together to meet the goal, which is services to the consumers and really help them to get in a better place.
Great, thanks, Gina. Robbie, I think you already talked about the funding piece, but if there's anything you want to add, feel free to do so.
I would like to add something regarding, leveraging some additional funding. So through our transitions, our community transitions program, we were able to secure some funding to create a pilot program. And that pilot program has like a twofold process. It allows us to transition folks from congregate settings, and then as long as someone who is unhoused, if they meet that nursing home level of care, we can use that funding to get the person out of that congregate setting, or to get the unhoused person, both have an opportunity to get into a hotel in order to get them, to get a roof over their head or get them out of the congregate setting. And with that funding, we're able to get someone into a hotel while the rest of the needs are addressed. There are specific Section 8 vouchers that are available through that pilot program. But even within that, they have the opportunity to stay in the hotel until that housing is secured. And then the rest of the supports are put in place to allow someone to be able to continue to live independently in the community, to get those services and those supports that they were receiving in that congregate setting. So that is something that we're excited about. And if I'm not mistaken, I think to date we've been able to transition 10 people. I'm not 100% sure on that, because that's a program that I'm not really involved with. And, the hope is that we'll be able to prove, the success and the need for a program like that, our hope is to continue to get some funding for that. And it's just an opportunity to kind of work outside of a lot of that longer process that may be involved with transitioning someone out of that institutional setting, because it really is kind of a condensed timeline.
Thanks, Robbie. So I'm going to skip past 32 because I know we covered this in the overview. We've got 8 minutes left. I want to make sure that we're able to address this next question, which is important, and then as many of your questions, the audience questions, as we could possibly get through. So Gina, I'm going to come to you. This question is, what kind of supports have you all included for people who are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or people of color, or otherwise multiply marginalized? And so what does that look like, and how are you all providing sort of culturally competent and authentic support in the Salinas and Monterey area?
So with us, we work a lot of monolingual consumers in our community, right? We have a lot of Latinos, Hispanic community. So what we have done is trying to be more inclusive. We have doing a lot of cultural competency trainings to the staff. That's an ongoing training that we have for all of them. Like I said, for us, it's mostly monolingual consumers, Spanish-speaking consumers. So the services that we provide are bilingual. We always try to have, bilingual staff, at least 2 or 3 case managers who are bilingual. That has been always, the case for us. We try to do offer services bilingual. In terms of the other communities, other marginalized communities, we mostly for us is the monolingual Latinos, Hispanic community. That's the main one that we have seen. So we have done a lot of education to tell them that it's okay to ask for services. There is nothing wrong with asking for help. It's a lot of education that we do for them, but it's also a lot of education that we do with the staff, how to be more culturally competent, to understand the culture that everyone has, the background, and just be more understanding. We also have some community partners that sometimes say, well, we don't have to have always bilingual. We don't have to have it on both English and Spanish. And we're like, well, we live in that community that is rural. We have a lot of monolingual consumers. We have a lot of people of color. So we have to be more inclusive for everyone. And we always push for that. So we do a lot of education. As an ILC, we educate not only on disability, but how to work more inclusive with all the communities that we have within Monterey County. But again, with us, the mainly is the monolingual consumers that we have, the Latino and Hispanic community that we have locally.
Great, thanks, Gina. Robbie, you talked a bit about the work that Atlantis has done in this area, but what would you like to add here about the way that you all have supported BIPOC folks and other folks who are multiply marginalized who are experiencing homelessness in Denver and the surrounding areas?
Sure, and as I said earlier, this part of the work is something that we're really starting to dig into, and it's starting with a lot of internal training opportunities, where if we have a new hire, we're putting together a training protocol for new hires, and then for existing staff, we're putting in place annual trainings. And we have access. So regarding monolingual communities, we're getting a lot of our material out in Spanish. And then we also have access to an interpreting line, which goes through a service in the metro area, where, I don't know that it's that it covers all the different languages, but there is a pretty extensive list of language interpreters, and we just make sure that our staff knows how to utilize that line, including with our mobile office. And it's just about getting into those BIPOC communities and just developing those relationships. You know, there may be times where we find consumers who aren't aware of specific resource centers within their community. The cultural side of it is also something that we're just trying to educate ourselves on, because there are those cultural differences, and some cultures disability is looked at from a different perspective, or just cultural differences of how different people are living their lives. So a lot of it for us is just educating ourselves and letting those communities know that, this is the type of work we do, and these are the services that are available if they choose to receive those services.
Great, thanks, Robbie. All right, everyone bear with me. I'm gonna move in a rapid fire way that I usually try not to do, to try to get through as many of these as we can. Robbie, Daryl is dying to know if Atlantis coordinates a share a home program. He says he's interested in starting something like that. Curious if you all have.
Well, first of all, I don't know that I'm 100% sure what share a home program is. I mean, I think I know just by this, by the name, but is it, I would maybe, if Daryl could just maybe, or Tim, if you could, like a little bit more specific about what that means.
Got it. I'm not sure, but I'll watch the Q&A and comments to see if Daryl provides any more context there. Lisa, I'm going to keep you up, Robbie. Lisa is wondering, popular question, ballpark cost, just roughly, of what it costs to purchase the mobile unit, and then about what it costs to operate it each year, including the staff.
Certainly. So the ballpark cost of the vehicle, including, getting it customized, I feel like it was in somewhere in the range between $80,000 and $90,000. The operating costs, our annual budget is in the neighborhood of about $100,000 per year. And that a lot, that covers the staff. It covers anything related to the mobile unit, fuel, insurance, a roadside assistance plan. Really, with that annual budget, it covers everything down to, separate office supplies and just about everything in between that.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. So Gina, I'm going to come to you. Stephanie is struggling with something in her community around shelter eligibility. So they've been working with more and more consumers who have been found shelter ineligible, quote unquote, and wondering if you have any experience with that or tips for Stephanie in working through that.
With us, we have a few of them that are not able to go back to any type of shelter. But again, it all depends on what happened between them and the shelter. Some of them, we have a lot of single males that we have shelters for families. So they're definitely not going to the shelter because they only are for families. We have a women's shelter, but we don't have a lot of, for a couples kind of shelter. And we also have consumers that they have pets. So the question that we had before and the issues that we're facing was that a lot of the consumers will not go to a shelter because they don't want to give up on their pet, on their service animal or their companion. So we work with them individually. We work with the shelter to work on the eligibility for their services. What are really some of the no-nos, like I will not take a 290 because they are registered sex offender and I have families in the shelter. Or it might be that, it's only a female shelter, but, the consumer is a male, but it really identifies a female. How can we work with them to do a lot of education on that? So those are the main barriers that we have. Basically, the 290s, lack of shelter because it's either for families, single women, but we don't have a lot of shelter for single adults. And the other problem that we have is even though it's a family shelter, we have that dad who is as a single parent. And that's the other barrier that we have with some of the shelters, that it's a family shelter, but it's for a female, single mother, but not a dad. So that's the other issue that we have. So we try to work with the local shelter to see why they were disqualified for the services. And we go from there. Is really knowing what the client is not able to access the shelter. Either they're full and they're always at capacity. So we need to know what's that for process. So I will say just become familiar with eligibility, but also become familiar with the funding source. Who is funding them? Like, where are they getting the funding from? Is that ESG? Is the county? Is the city? Is the state funding? Because that is going to help you a lot to find, like, okay, well, I see that you're getting funding from the ESG and this eligibility for ESG, or I see that you're getting funding from local in whole person care, this is a whole person care client. So it just become familiar with the funding source, eligibility, referral, and what's the intake process like?
Thanks, Gina. All right. We are out of time. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to more of the questions. We make every effort to do that. I hope you all recognize this is really the beginning of an important conversation, and we will be doing more webinars on supporting people, especially who are in congregate or in stable environments or living in places that don't meet that sort of traditional nursing home institution definition. But need IL services and are people with disabilities and need support. I was thrilled to see the great turnout for today's webinar. I did share Georgina and Robbie's contact information in the chat. I meant to put that in the PowerPoint. I'm sorry that wasn't there. We will add that to the PowerPoint before it goes up on the on-demand webpage. Here on slide 35 is the link to the evaluation survey. Now you can copy and, well, you can't, it's not a live link in the screen share. But remember, when I close the webinar in just a moment here, it's going to open on your screen. I hope you'll let us know what you thought, what we could do better. And this was also included in the materials email that you received yesterday. With that, we are going to close in the interest of time, but thanks to all of you for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.